All right, welcome to the Fantasy Tip-Off here. I am SoCal. This is Coach Craig. 2024, we are back after the holiday season, so Happy New Year to everybody watching. Hope you had a great holiday season. We're back to get into the swing of things. It is week 12 of the fantasy basketball season. I know we just had a mid-season fantasy draft to get our season in full swing. Plenty of NBA news. We had a big trade, right? We had RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly were the two pieces from the Knicks that went to the Raptors. OG Anunoby, now a Knick, probably the biggest trade we've definitely seen to start this season. A little bit of injury news. We got Chris Paul now out 4 to 6 weeks. Potential Cade Cunningham, maybe an injury. Porzingis dealing with an injury. So a few big names to monitor. Some news around the new year that we'll get into. Week 12. Coach Craig, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. So, like, with those injuries, too, it looks like Porzingis is going to be all right. He got poked in the eye the other night or whatever. I thought he was not going to play today. It's Monday when we're recording this. The Celtics play tonight, but he's already been ruled in for tonight. We do know that Tatum and Hauser are both out tonight, but Tatum's just kind of a rest game, and Hauser's a little bit of shoulder soreness at this point in time. It's the first game he's missed all year. Cunningham is going to be that interesting one because he left last night's game with the knee injury. They're calling it a left knee strain, which is something you typically don't hear with knee injuries. Is this strain word? You usually hear a sprain or, some soreness or some swelling, or, you tore some, you twisted some. Strain is just the word that you don't typically get there. So we'll see what it looks like for him. Maybe in the meantime, if you want to play a little bit more Jaden Ivey, a little more Alec Burks, maybe Marcus Sasser reemerges in the meantime as well. A couple extra minutes for some of those guys just in general. Chris Paul is pretty much the biggest one that we've had as of late, in terms of he broke his left hand, had surgery. I think he had surgery already. They were talking about doing it this week. So I don't know if he technically had it yet or not, but he'll miss 4 to 6 weeks after that. Probably lean closer to the 6 weeks timeline myself, but he will open up some minutes for those Warrior guys. And we saw Andrew Wiggins return to the lineup last night in terms of the starting lineup. So we'll see if that's what it looks like moving forward. Obviously, Draymond is going to be coming back relatively soon. He has been reinstated. He says he might need like up to a week to ramp up, but I think he's probably good to play maybe their next game or the game after that at this point.
So who's the biggest beneficiary on the Warriors with Paul? I mean, we're talking, 6 weeks. That's a lot of basketball games. So who are the guards there that you're looking at to really fill those minutes?
So it's a tough one because, Gary Payton's been missing a lot of time too. I think it's still his foot injury that's been bothering him. Moses Moody played really well last night. I think it was last night when they played. When I was looking, he played like 21 minutes. He made like 4 threes or something like that too. But he's just a guy, like, he goes in and out of the rotation so much for Steve Kerr that's kind of frustrating. It's just something Steve Kerr does. And Kuminga's pissed off at Kerr because of how he's treated him too. And it's kind of the same way with Moody as of late. So I think he benefits, but like, the day that you go out and trust him, you pick him up and you stream him, then Steve Kerr just plays him no minutes. And that's kind of something that just always happens with Steve Kerr. It seems like he'll randomly play Corey Joseph out of nowhere just because.
Yeah, we talked about Moses Moody. He filled in nicely, over the times he's got to play. But like you said, with Kuminga, of course, after Kuminga got bothered, he did play the most minutes of any Warriors player the following game. So I doubt that changes what Kerr's done for years, but I agree. I think Moses Moody is definitely someone to just keep an eye on. If he's going to get consistent minutes, I think he's produced when given that opportunity. So, Paul's the biggest news for sure.
I'll say it was last Thursday, I think it was, his 2-game DFS slate. And I'm like, Moses Moody looks like a decent play today. And then all of a sudden, Steve Kerr went to a 9-man rotation for, I believe, the first time all season. He's a guy that always plays like 10 or 11. And then it's just like all of a sudden he played 9 for no reason.
Hard to trust that, but definitely a name to watch out for. 6 weeks of time is a good chunk. So if you see Moses Moody getting those consistent minutes, probably somebody that's available, definitely somebody to keep an eye on there. So, as we get into some of these free agents, we just mentioned, 2 guys that were involved in a trade. I know they're probably on the top of your list. One is Emmanuel Quickly. One is RJ Barrett. Where are they rostered at leagues, and what's going on with them moving forward?
Yeah, so both of them will be starting for the Raptors essentially moving forward. We've seen it for a couple games now at this point in time. RJ Barrett coming off a really strong performance. Emmanuel Quickly's done pretty well in his new role there too. Both guys are probably already rostered, but worth checking on at this point in time. Quickly's 49% on ESPN, 75% on Yahoo as of the time I was looking last night. And then RJ Barrett's 59% on ESPN, 78% on Yahoo. That probably went up today since he had that pretty big performance against the Golden State Warriors yesterday. So they're guys that are probably already rostered, but definitely make sure that they are not just sitting on your waiver wire for some reason.
Definitely. And then OG Anunoby, I mean, going to the Knicks, does that change any value for him? Fantasy? Is he the same player over there that he is in Toronto in the fantasy spectrum?
I think he's pretty much the same player. The one thing maybe you'll say is Tom Thibodeau has been known to play bigger minutes on starters, so he might ramp up once again. We saw it before in the past with the Raptors. Nick Nurse always ran his guys, 38, 40 minutes a lot of times. So maybe you start seeing that with the Knicks once again. Obviously, I can't remember the name of the coach for the Raptors now. It's like Darko or something like that. He has been playing a little bit more balanced minutes as opposed to kind of what Nick Nurse has done in the past. So you could see a couple extra minutes. So maybe he does a little bit more in some of those minutes, but otherwise the role is going to be pretty similar between the two different teams.
It's still Randall and Brunson over there. I think OG will find his role a little more as we go here in the offense, but I mean, the ISO game they play with Randall and Brunson, it's, those guys looking to score 30 plus a night. And like I said, maybe that changes as the season goes, but yeah, I think the same player there. But I think, these first few games, he hasn't got to score too much. He's kind of just been finding who he is on that team. The Knicks have won, 4 in a row since he got there. So, it's not broke, don't fix it in the NBA world. We know, with NFL, the real game doesn't always care about our fantasy game. So they're going to do what works to win basketball games. And OG seems to be a guy that brings to the table whatever you need to win the ball game, so he'll take 3 shots and be out there for 30 plus minutes, help you win a basketball game, maybe not help your fantasy lineup too much there.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is the other guy that came over that trade is Precious Achiuwa, who's just a backup big man at this point in time. They're still playing Hartenstein a ton of minutes, and Achiuwa is getting like 12 minutes a game pretty much at this point. But if he works his way into the rotation more, he's been a guy in the past that's shown some upside. Not really as much this year. He's been really bad this year. So that's kind of a lot of Toronto fans were kind of happy when he got traded away, honestly.
So we'll see how that unfolds. But I mean, I think good moves for all those guys, good changes, good for both teams. Like I said, the fantasy world probably gives Quickly and Barrett a little lift up. They are heavily rostered, but still, I mean, half the leagues, if they're out there, there's probably a spot on your bench for them, So who else you got for me?
Yeah, so this week is kind of a little bit different end. So we got a lot of guys that are probably roster, and then we got a lot of deeper guys. So the other 2 guys that are on this that, there's a good chance to roster: Trey Jones, point guard for the San Antonio Spurs, 49% on ESPN, 54% on Yahoo. He's played and started the last 2 games. He's had 30 plus minutes in both those 2 games. Malachi Brandon was hurt for one of those games. He was a guy that we mentioned previously on an episode because he had been starting. And Brandon did play off the bench the second game where he only played like 15 minutes. We'll see if Trey Jones sticks around in that starting lineup. That's kind of been a talking point for me probably a lot of times this year is with San Antonio. When you got such a good ball handler like that and you're just not starting him and you're not playing him probably as much as you should, there was a little bit of concern there. But if they're going to roll with this starting lineup for a while and Trey Jones is that point guard once again, because they tried this whole Jeremy Sohan point forward, point guard experiment and it just hasn't gone well. Brandon played some point guard at Ohio State, and they just really didn't want to roll him out there. They tried to roll him Devin Vassell, making him like the point guard, and it just really, a lot of these things just haven't worked. They're just trying to get too cute for whatever reason. So if Trey Jones is out there, if he's starting, if he's playing 28, 30 minutes a night, he's going to be pretty interesting overall. And kind of the second one there is a guy that did return, I believe, yesterday or Saturday. I can't remember which off the top of my head. Markelle Fultz, point guard for the Orlando Magic. He did come off the bench in that game. He's been dealing with a lot of knee issues so far this season. So he had an early stint this year where he missed some time with his knee. He came back, he played for a while, and then it started swelling up again, essentially. He is only 15% rostered on ESPN, 56% on Yahoo. So you'll see a big disparity there. if you're playing on ESPN, he's probably available and probably a guy that you should at least throw on your bench to stash. Because when this guy ramps up and he plays full minutes, he's a guy that you want on your team. But when he's not available, it's not pretty. But he did come back. He played, I think it was like 15, 16, maybe even 18 minutes the other day. But if he can get back up to that 30 minutes a night, he's a guy that can definitely help your team down the stretch. I had a team last year that really did utilize him when he was healthy. Those
And
are kind
Markel
of the
Fultz definitely
main
had
ones.
a good year last year. I mean, after kind of, being this guy, went down, came back up, really found his spot there. Last season, unfortunately, had the injury this year, but I think he's somebody that they're going to get him back in that rotation. So he's one of those guys that you want to get now and buy before the break, because I think it's coming. So you got to get in now. If not, you miss out on somebody like that. So if you've got a spot on your bench, I definitely like him. Like you mentioned with San Antonio, I think, so John, I mean, you can't play these guys at point guard that aren't point guards, not consistently. I know teams want to do it. Even the Lakers talking about running LeBron at point, like it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, Trey is a guy that is a point guard, can get the job done. So I think moving forward, San Antonio sticks more with that, but we'll see what happens there. I know one of the guys that I like, we talked about before the show here, Larry Nance, another guy coming off of injury. Probably haven't heard much about him with the fact that, he's not a prominent player. He was out with the rib injury, but he's quietly, getting about 8 points, 8 rebounds a night, around that 20-minute mark. The question will be, is he going to get an uptick in minutes? We know when the matchup is there, right? Fast-paced game. He's going to be out there. And if you're streaming guys, day in and day out, or setting your lineups, and he's got some good matchups, if you can get 8 points and 8 rebounds, I think he's worth monitoring. And when Zion's healthy, Nance has been a good player. I think he plays well with Zion. So if you're going to get 20 minutes from a guy, and maybe if he stays healthy, they start to pivot and play him a little bit more, I can see him getting more minutes as he comes back from that rib injury. So I think he's kind of a nice quiet pickup. And I think you mentioned he was like 5% owned in ESPN and maybe 20% on Yahoo.
Yeah, about 20 on Yahoo.
So definitely a name to watch, I think, is Larry Nance. Another guy that we mentioned on one of the shows previously was Simone Fontecchio of the Jazz. He is the guy that's kind of taken on that role. He's been a little up and down, but when he plays, I mean, he had 2 games in a row where, he averaged 20 points. He knocks down the 3 ball. He had another game where he was right around 12 points. But we talked about, Olynyk's minutes decreasing, probably being traded. This is a guy that's playing in the starting lineup at times, a guy that can give you some points, some rebounds, some threes. I think the Jazz have 4 games this week. So if we're looking at volume, especially right now, I think Fontecchio is still out there in a lot of leagues. He's somebody that can help you this week. And I think he's somebody, as the season goes, on a young, bad Utah team that can give you those numbers, right? I mean, we don't care if you win the game. Give me a guy that's out there getting minutes, producing in multiple categories. I still think he's someone that we've talked about that is out there widely available.
Yeah, the good thing with him is he's playing a lot of minutes. Kind of the one major thing with him is he's very point scoring dependent. So if he's scoring points, he's going to do pretty well. What I think it was one of the days last week, I even threw him in DFS as a core pick. And then, of course, that was the one day he didn't do very well. But consistently playing a lot of minutes, it seems like they're sticking to that starting lineup that they've been running out there a lot as of late, which is Chris Dunn, Colin Sexton, Fontecchio, Laurie Markman, and John Collins at the 5. So that's kind of what they've been sticking with as of late. John Collins probably gets moved around the trade deadline. Maybe Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson do as well. There could be a lot of opportunities opening up for this Utah team just in general, but kind of depends on who gets hot on any given night for them because they have a lot of guys that can score points at times.
Who else you got on your list? You got anybody else?
Yeah, so I got a bunch of guys here that are kind of a little bit deeper. So Sam Merrill's a guy that's been playing more for the Cavs as of late. He's just a guy that really just helps in terms of 3-point shooting. That's it. Like, he's not going to do too much else for you. He's just a guy that's going to be out there on the floor spacing it out. He's not really rostered on ESPN and 2% on Yahoo. Been playing decent minutes as of late. He was dealing with a little bit of wrist injury there for a while in between like his kind of good starts, but if they get, when Darius Garland comes back, he's not going to play at all. Craig Porter Jr. was playing some when Donovan Mitchell was out, but now it seems like Sam Merrill's kind of that reserve guard off the bench too, since Mitchell and Karis LeVert are both healthy at this point in time. They kind of run the point when they're out there. So he's definitely a guy, if you're looking for threes, you're in a deeper league, definitely could consider. Uh, I was just listening to a thing earlier today too, where Amani Bates might get called back up though too, so he might take over that role at some point too. He just scored like 38 points for their the Cleveland Chargers, their G League team or something like that. And he was knocking down threes like crazy. So like if you're in a deep league and you want to stash somebody, you could, because he was a guy that was super hyped up at one point in time, like number one player in the country out of high school. Went to Memphis, didn't do much there. Went to Eastern Michigan, scored a bunch of points, but wasn't super efficient. But you still had a lot of hype at the same time. Some of these other guys that are a little bit deeper here. So Dot Breath for Portland, he 27-year-old rookie. It's kind of a weird story. He went to LSU, then kind of played overseas, then came over now. So he is 1% roster on ESPN, 12% on Yahoo. He's been playing more and playing pretty well as of late. He was dealing with a little bit of back injury there. But DeAndre Ayton, I don't know when he's actually going to play half the time anymore, just because his knee issue has been a problem. Obviously, they had Robert Williams. He's done for the year. They had Moses Brown, who was playing a little bit too at some of those center minutes. He's been dealing with the wrist injury. Jabari Walker, they were getting a couple of minutes at center here and there. He's been banged up now too. So Dot Breath is just like the last big guy left there besides Baji, who's just not good. He was on a two-way the last couple of years for them, barely played over those years. And played like 15 minutes, a couple games in recent games, but just not that great overall. So Dot Breath is just a little bit of an interesting guy. He's been showing the ability to score the ball at the very least. Rebounds are kind of down at the beginning of the year, but doing a little bit better in that regard so far as of late. Their most recent game, he played 40 minutes. The game did go into overtime though, so take that with a grain of salt. But if he's going to be out there playing big minutes, he's definitely a guy to roster, because he does have some serious upside, at least while DeAndre is out. And then the last guy that I did list here is Caleb Houston for the Orlando Magic. He's small forward eligible. He also does have shooting guard on ESPN. He is essentially not rostered on ESPN and 1% on Yahoo. Playing more minutes lately for this Orlando Magic team with all the injuries. Joe Ingles being out kind of opened up his bench spot for him. And then we saw Franz Wagner miss. Anthony Black was kind of banged up with illness and whatnot too. So Houston's kind of played more minutes as of late, taking advantage of those. Guy that played pretty well at Michigan a couple of years ago. He's been with this Magic team for a little while. Can do a little bit of everything, but really hasn't had too many opportunities, too many minutes. Probably just a guy you kind of stream here and there if he stays, in that starting lineup or playing a key role off the bench. But as they get healthier, he'll be a guy that fades away. But for at least now, when everybody else is kind of banged up, because you're talking Markelle Fultz just came back, but like at the same time, Gary Harris has been out now. Franz Wagner's been out. Joe Ingles, Jonathan Isaac. Like there's so many guys on this team that have just kind of been banged up and missing time. Wendell Carter Jr. missed a lot of time for a while too. So he's definitely got to consider at this point until at least his role changes.
Yeah, it's a Magic team that had 8 players available, the other night. I mean, so there's obviously minutes to be had there. And if you're out there producing, I mean, you're going to get them. So I like that. Definitely some nice deep stashes there. One name on my list, kind of on the deeper range right now, is probably Cam Whitmore on the Rockets. Tari Easton's got that injury. This is a first-round pick, that's finding his way kind of in the rotation due to that injury. Last 4 or 5 games, he's been right around double digits. The minutes are coming. I think he's somebody that he's not right there where he's playing consistently and producing right now. But if we're talking about somebody that may find his spot there, he's like a week or two early now to get in on. But sometimes when you want to stash a guy, you got to get him a little early. And I think he's somebody, again, on a young team that, the Rockets are okay, but I think they overachieved a little bit to start the season. I don't think down the stretch they're going to be really a contending type team in the West. So I think he's going to get an opportunity to be a part of this rotation. And depending on what happens with Easton moving forward, if that injury is long-term at all or re-aggravates, I think Whitmore is a nice guy with a lot of upside to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and he's a guy that was kind of projected to go like top 6 or 7 in the NBA draft. He fell because of a knee injury that popped up like kind of during the workouts and the medicals and all that stuff. So they kind of lucked out when they got him. He's playing, like 16, 18 minutes tonight right now, especially with Dylan Brooks and Tariisa missing time. We'll see if that trend continues once those guys get back. Initially, Jay Sean Tate was in the starting lineup. He was playing like 28, 30 minutes a night, and he's even got his minutes cut now. They kind of gone a little bit more in favor of guys like Cam Whitmer. Amen Thompson's playing a little bit more since he's gotten healthier. Jeff Green's playing a ton of minutes as of late too. So if you really want to stream Jeff Green on any given night, I guess you can do it. But that dude's like 36, 37 now at this point in time. Props
Seems
to
to
him for going
produce
out
no
there and
matter
playing.
what, man. He's the ageless wonder of the NBA, man. Jeff Green. I mean, he somehow goes out there and gets the job done every night, every season.
Well, if you're one of those people that are out there playing like the Immaculate Grids or anything like that, he's a great answer for a lot of the NBA ones because he's played on like half the teams in the league, it feels like.
If you don't know, just go with Jeff Green. You got a good shot of him fitting in the grid for sure.
Yep.
So anybody else on your list, or you want to get into some matchups this week? And
we'll get into matchups. I think another guy that's secretly quiet for those Immaculate Grids is actually Sam Merrill, because he's actually played on so many different teams. He's played on the Cavs, the Bucks, the Grizzlies. I'm probably forgetting like the other three off the top of my head, but he's played for like 6 different teams, and the dude's only like 27, only been around for like 5 years.
By the time he's Jeff Green's age, he'll be on, he'll be every answer. So,
yeah, we'll get into some of the matchups though. So there are a lot of teams that play 4 games this week. I'm just going to throw this out here before we get going too far. Is the Nets and the Cavaliers only play 1 game this week. So if you're in a league where you're setting your lineup for like the entire week, probably just pull those guys, honestly, unless you have like no clear better options, because they're only playing the 1 game, which is in Europe. It's in Paris, France this week. I believe the NBA just started this last year, where they played. Last year was the Bulls and the Pistons that played in that game. So it was kind of cool that year because you had Killian Hayes kind of going back home because he grew up in France. His dad played over there when he was younger and whatnot too. I think his mom's from there like originally too as well. But that was a pretty interesting one. But if you got Nets and Cavalier players, probably avoid them. And it's kind of awkward, I guess, since we talked about adding Sam Merrill, but you could also stash them on the bench at the same time. In terms of the kind of the favorable matchups, the Hornets, not the greatest team in the world. They got all these injuries, so their starters are playing big minutes either way. So they look all right for fantasy, but they play the Bulls, the Kings, the Spurs, and the Heat this week. So the Bulls not that great on defense. The Kings and the Spurs are going to be pace up spots. The one matchup not the greatest is the Miami Heat, who are going to play pretty slow. But, some of these guys could have some decent upside this week, whether it's your Terry Rozier. Cody Martin's back, and he's playing a lot of minutes, although he's questionable today with a groin injury now since I threw him in my core picks. But that's a story for a different day. I love to see that guy stay healthy just because of how unhealthy he's been the last 2 seasons, unfortunately. And then we got
on Charlotte real quick too. We talked about this guy, on one of the first couple of shows, and that was Nick Richards, who's still widely available, still producing double-digit rebounds. I know the other night against Chicago, he only had like 2 or 4 points. He's only going to get you probably 7 or 8, but in some of these up-paced games, he's probably going to be 8 to 11 points and get those double-digit rebounds. So just kind of piggybacking on, like you said, you've got a Net, you've got a Cavalier, 1 game as opposed to 13 teams playing 4 games. Get a guy like that, put him in your lineup. You get 4 games from a guy that might get you 10 and 10 for 3 or 4 games on the week. I still think Nick Richards is a great play, especially while, Mark Williams is still out. But this week he gets 4 games. So if you can grab him and play him for a guy, especially like a Net or a Cav, he's still a guy, on my list for sure.
Yeah, and right now, at least for tonight's game, PJ Washington's out too as well. I think it was a calf that he's dealing with, so that could be a couple game missing there too. Sometimes those calves end up being like 2-week injuries, so he's not losing as many small ball 5 minutes to him at that point in time too. But Richards is a guy I like. He's a little bit inconsistent at times, but does have some pretty decent upside when he gets there. The opposite end of that, we got the Bulls, who play the Hornets, the Rockets, the Warriors, and the Spurs. The Hornets, the Warriors, and the Spurs are all going to be pace-up spots for this Bulls team. They are getting pretty healthy at this point in time. Vucevic and Zach LaVine did return on Friday. They both played off the bench, and they both had minutes limit. Zach LaVine is ultimately questionable for tonight's game on Monday, so we'll see whether or not he plays. Vucevic, it sounds like he'll be in once again, so they are getting pretty healthy. If you want to play some Bulls players just in general, it doesn't feel like a bad time to do them at this week. The one matchup that's not the greatest is the Rockets, who have been pretty good defensively, though.
How about the play of Andre Drummond here recently?
Well, Drummond's a guy, if he gets the minutes, he's going to be amazing. So even in the, even if you're looking at the aspect, Vucevic came back, he played like 25, Drummond played 23, 24. If they're just splitting it straight down the middle, you can still play Drummond because he can pay off in 24 minutes pretty easily.
Especially with those matchups you named. I mean, a few of those, the rebounds are going to be there for him. I mean, he doesn't need a lot of minutes to, get you 10, 12 rebounds. I mean, again, kind of similar to Richards and even a little better offensively. So still not a bad streaming option this week, I think, for Drummond.
Yeah. Then we get down to the Pacers. The Pacers have two matchups in terms of pace, and the Wizards and the Hawks. We saw them go against the Hawks last week, and I believe the over-under in that game was 260 points, which is about the highest I think there's been all season. Wizards game, obviously, the Wizards play fast and they don't play defense too. The other two games, going against Celtics and Nuggets, they'll be pace down spots for the Pacers in general, but they'll be pretty interesting games to watch, and you still get 4 games in total. So Pacers going to look pretty interesting. They've been dealing with a little bit of injuries here and there too. Bruce Brown had a knee one, but he missed a couple games, came back, then sat off the back-to-back, should be back tonight. Andrew Nemhard's missed a couple games with a back injury, but not anybody like super, super interesting for fantasy purposes, at least.
No, I think if you really need to stream somebody, I mean, we talked about, TJ McConnell possibly at the guard position. I think you could look at, Obi Toppin or Jalen Smith. I mean, Smith has slid in the starting lineup, but they're kind of still just splitting minutes. They just took Toppin out of the lineup. But I think those 3 guys this week, if you really need somebody, are probably 3 guys, at least worth looking at, where at least you're going to get, a lot of points scored, a lot of pace, and, a little bit of upside with 3 of those guys possibly. I mean, you could go McConnell and then, only get, 10 minutes of the game and get you nothing depending on if they blow people out or not. But I think at the, forward position, Toppin or Jalen Smith, I think can give you a little production this week.
Mm-hmm. And even at the same time, too, if Benedict Matherin's out there, maybe he's a guy that you stash too, just in general. His minutes have been super, super inconsistent as of late, but the rumors are that Buddy Hield's very, very much on the trade block at this point in time. So that could open up some more minutes just in general, even though they pulled him out of the starting lineup as of late.
Buddy Hield's been on the trading block since he's become a Pacer.
Yeah, he's pretty much on the trading block everywhere he's been in his whole NBA career. But he also started his NBA career at like 24 too, because he was in college for forever, it seemed like. Then we get down to the Bucks. The Bucks play the Jazz tonight. Then they got Celtics, Warriors, and Kings. So 3 pace-up spots there in the Jazz, the Warriors, and the Kings. The one tougher spot will be against the Celtics, which should be a pretty competitive game just in general. For tonight's game, they have no Damian Lillard because he's out for personal reasons, and they have no Cameron Payne, his backup point guard, because he has a concussion. So it's going to be a very interesting game, because they don't really have point guard options for tonight just in general. So probably going to be a lot of Chris Middleton and Giannis doing ball handling duties. Technically, they do have Ty Washington, who's played all right in the G League this year, but are they going to roll him out for too many minutes? Who knows? It could be Beauchamp starting. It could be Andre Jackson Jr. It could be Pat Connaughton, and we'll just kind of have to see how that all plays out. But the Bucks look like a pretty interesting team this week with the 4 games and 3+ matchups. Let's see. 76ers, I do like the matchups they have this week. They got the Hawks and the Kings, but they only play those 2 games this week. But both of them are going to be very favorable spots. I know Joel Embiid sat out the other day because his knee was swollen up or something like that. So hopefully the lighter week is good for him just in general, but should be 2 pretty favorable matchups in general for him. If you want to look at him, Kelly Oubre is a guy that I almost threw on the list too for waivers, but he's a little bit more rostered than I probably like, but he's been playing pretty well as of late. So definitely could see him pop off in those matchups as well. And then last but not least, we got the Spurs, who play the Pistons, the Hornets, and the Bulls, which are all 3+ matchups. Maybe the Spurs can even win 3 games this week. Who knows?
That'd be interesting. I don't know if they can win 3 games in a row. They're such a bad second half team that I don't know if they can hold on to pull off 3 wins in a row there. But
maybe
yeah, with the Sixers, I mean, the Sixers, you're playing the guys on their team because of the, Maxey and Embiid, but they don't have like the depth, production wise fantasy, like a team like Indiana, where they're worth really streaming. And the fact that it's 2 games and so many teams are playing 3 and 4 games, it's hard to reach for anybody on some of those teams, that have 2 games this week. you look at like the Clippers, who also have 4 games. You look at a guy like, Norman Powell that can get you some points, that can shoot threes. There's just so many teams this week that are playing 13 teams that are playing 4 games. This is definitely a week that if you need some streaming options, go look at those teams playing 13 games. Go look at those high-paced matchups that we talked about, guys that are going to get in and get you, 20 minutes or so, maybe more. You'll benefit this week from those guys for sure.
And then last but not least, we got to put it out there. The Kings play on the back-to-back on the 10th. So
the back-to-back, baby. Put the house on it.
that's Wednesday. The bad part is against the Charlotte Hornets. So maybe the streak finally comes to an end where the Kings don't play terrible on the back-to-back, but they play in Detroit on the 9th. Then they got to fly out of Detroit, fly over to Charlotte, which, it's not a bad place. It's pretty easy to fly into Charlotte. It's pretty easy to fly out of Detroit, but you're still going back to back. You're still on the road for both games. The Kings cannot play on the second half of the back-to-back whatsoever this year. So if you want to bet some Charlotte money line, it's probably going to be a decent profit there to be had, even though Charlotte's pretty banged up right now too. I wouldn't be surprised if they win this game. But maybe this is the time that the Kings finally break that long losing streak of back-to-backs. They've lost the 4 that they've played so far this year, and most of them have not been close whatsoever. I think 3 of them have been by at least 18 points. The other one, I think, was by 10 or 12. All of them have been by double digits.
A little better opponents, but hey, they lost to Charlotte already once this season as, 16-point favorites. Charlotte took them, straight up, and that was, I think, in Sacramento, if I'm not mistaken. So a Kings team that is hard to trust, a Kings team that just got beat by 33 yesterday. CJ McCollum went off. He's been a nice, pleasant surprise, man. He's a great player. I think he stays healthy. He's going to be a solid fantasy stud and obviously good for that team. But outside of that, man, you got anything else for this week that you want to leave the people with?
No, I don't think there's too much this week. Obviously, we'll see kind of what happens over the next month, especially in terms of trades, because trade deadline's coming up in about a month. So there's a lot of news, a lot of rumors out there. We'll kind of ultimately see what ultimately ends up happening and what doesn't. But it's going to be a very interesting one, and especially if it ends up anything like it usually does for the NBA in the past couple of years. I think it was 26 trades on right around the trade deadline day last year. So look out, there's going to be things that are ultimately happening, especially with some of these guys opening up, these guys that signed these contracts this last season, they'll be able to be traded, I believe, next week.
Nice. Be plenty of action, plenty to talk about. So, all right, man. So week 12, we got it, man. A lot of action. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, anything you want to talk about, let us know. Can't wait to discuss more of week 13. We'll be back next week for sure on the Fantasy Tip-Off. Just keep following us. We're going to try to be putting out, at least the one a week like we talked about. We'll try to be adding stuff as we get deeper into the season, but appreciate y'all. Appreciate you, Coach. And with that, Fantasy Tip-Off, we'll see you next week.